I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Martyn Element, a Vancouver marketing and corporate consultant who focuses on sourcing and pursuing new business ventures. Welcome back to the show, Martyn.
Welcome. It's been 2 or 3 weeks, listeners. I've been extremely busy. And so has the market. Of course, the market never sleeps, just the same as money. And I've got interesting thoughts that I've been thinking and planning in my head. So, as we say, Jim, bowl them away.
Lithium. You can't have an electric car without it. How big of a business is lithium becoming?
I have, this last few weeks, been very close to the lithium business. Which is to be expected given that it's still got a nice frothy head going on at the moment. Yes, there's 2 new lithium deals a day at the moment, and so many of them are promoters with opportunistic, and so many of them come without, I think, the managerial skills, because it's an area that hasn't had a lot of exposure in, and it's becoming so important to see that all happening. And there's so many observations that I've sort of got in layman's terms, ladies and gentlemen, not specific. This is like, as we've said before, a living blog that I talk about and I observe, but I've noticed a few differences here between the brine and the solid rock type of lithium, for instance. And the skeptics and a lot of the people will say you must be very, very leery, unless it's a full production already kind of situation, i.e., like there seems to be a lot of down in Argentina at the moment, where you're actually buying into a producing situation. But to be speculating and trying to find lithium, perhaps, and to use a simple example would be Nevada, because you're dealing with salts, equivalent like salt flats, except it's in the lithium, and you're dealing, and please, I am stressing the fact this is me, not a geologist, but some of the areas on that particular are almost as important on the topography side of things as it is on the geology, because you're dealing in a probably a very much more liquid moving form, and probably quite recent as well compared to the solid rock form of lithium. And by that, listeners, I mean, if the area is very mountainous that this company has gone and staked, and that's all it is a whole bunch of mountains, which is very easy, of course, in the state of Nevada, you're unlikely to find lithium on the side of a mountain, because it sort of goes down in more so in the valleys or in the more lower areas. I'm saying, of course, here, but so there's a lot of skepticism about a lot of, for instance, of these Nevada plays that are away from what happens to be, I'm told, the largest producing lithium mine in America is in Nevada. So, of course, there's an awful lot of excitement from that regard. But buyer beware, because of what I'm saying, that's great, but it can be very, very difficult to find. And moving along there's another situation that a good friend of mine has recently financed in Manitoba. They are dealing, I believe, in the hard rock type of lithium. And there's a lot of work done in the 50s on a whole group of properties there that have recently been changing hands. And they have a lot of information to work with. But there again, they need to be drilling. And when you've got old information, you can't use it to try and promote your company, and rightfully so too, because a lot can happen between 1950 and now, of course, and rightfully so. But you can glean some very good, valuable potential information by going over some of the information and saying, well, they put a hole down over here. Why don't we do another parallel hole, or one stepping out a little ways from that, and see if we can catch the same similar to results that were reported in 52, but now we're in 216. So that is an area to keep an eye on in deals that are in that Manitoba area. And then moving across the map, you've got Quebec. And Quebec, there's one company there called Namaska. It's either $300 million or $600 million cap. I mean, it would be argued that it's way, way ahead of itself. But we're back talking about what Goldman Sachs calls, and others, the oil and gas of the future. And, so staying with Quebec for a minute, Quebec is, of course, the hard rock. And there are some very successful mines there. And there's a beginning of speculation going on in Quebec as well. And that makes for perhaps more interesting, because they're called, I think they're called pegmatites, is the type of deposit in the rock. And pegmatites and pallactites or something, two different kinds. But they break out at surface. So that's when you can say that, well, we're finding a lot of low grade, perhaps it's more often than not, but you're finding traces, or you're finding lithium at surface, but it's because it's breaking out on a trend. So that might be, or could be considered perhaps a little easier to try and track. Still no high speculation, listeners. We all know that. But, that makes for interesting. A friend of mine was very involved in one of the largest deposits in the world in Serbia, and he went looking around, I think it's $1.5 billion going into production, Rio Tinto in Serbia. It's the only deposit of that size, I believe, in Europe. So that's what, that's an interesting scenario. I've heard of lithium being found in Africa. And, people say, Africa's difficult to deal in, and for this reason and that reason. Well, tell that to the Lundins, of course, but Goldman's they've been making some predictions that haven't been that correct lately, but I think they're absolutely right when they talk about lithium being the gasoline of today. And right now, we are still dealing in hundreds of %. And, for as far as usage. So, I think that lithium is so much like, to me, what we've witnessed recently here in the marijuana market, where we know it's coming. Most people believe it is going to be a major force. It already is in certain states in America, of course. It's coming to our own country in Canada. It's already been legalized in places like Uruguay. The tax revenues and all of the problems, so many of the problems that were predicted to be associated with it haven't happened in many, many ways. So, marijuana stocks is so similar to what's going on right now with the lithium running in, and the stampede that's going on for new deals coming out. And there will be pullbacks. There's been one recently, arguably, on lithium just recently, because they did a step out of a Nevada play. I think it was Pure Energy, which was probably the first stock that started a lot of the stampede, with Elon Musk making a deal with that company, trying to keep in the right side of the government of Nevada, given what he's doing there with his factory, of course, but his battery factory. But, and they did a step out, and it was a complete disaster, and it caused the stock to almost half in value right afterwards. But so I think there will be some pullback, and there will be some peaks and valleys on the stock. But I think the overall is that we are witnessing similar to the discovery of oil and the using of oil for causing the vehicles, from the horse to the automobile. And just as when the horse to the automobile in the United States, there was hundreds of car manufacturers, I think, there's hundreds of marijuana startup companies. And yes, there will be consolidation. I was just saying to Jim before we went on air that I actually have been to Lansing, Michigan. But the rest of the title equated to Lansing, Michigan is Lansing, Michigan, home of the Oldsmobile. And we ourselves, very few of us none of us would be around that would be able to comment or watch the early consolidation of all those automobile companies in the 20s and the 30s. But, we have been around in our lifetime, a lot of us, to see the consolidation of the automobile. And yes, the birth of General and Ford. And I see no difference happening with the marijuana companies and coming right up to here with the lithium. And I think, and I said with the marijuana, the same as lithium. I think, yes, there will be peaks and valleys, but it's trying to pick the right team that has the management skills, they have the experience, or they have the ways to be able to raise enough money. And as some comments were being made to me earlier, there's a lot of marijuana companies out there that have got they're in the right space. They might even have the license, but they didn't have the wherewithal to raise the money to wait out the governing or the changing of the laws. So there's so many different things to factor, and the lithium space will be no different. But I do believe that, the passion is there. And I was just thinking, I have young children myself. They are going to look at us in the years to come when they say to us, "Dad, did you really take oil and burn it? And all the, and you're destroying a product that had all those other products within it, and you just burned it for heating your house or for and we'll seem like, we'll seem so archaic, not unlike you actually took a plant and rolled it up and smoked it, and yet it had all these toxic, things put into it, like called cigarettes. And I mean, it all comes down to very basic. So I'm making the point of saying that I think lithium, there will be peaks and valleys, but I think at the moment the percentages are so small. Probably, 1% or less than 1% of all the automobiles on the road are electric right now. But that doesn't mean to say that, in the future that percentage is going to start going up and up, and there's going to be a huge need for lithium. And right now Macquarie, a very prestigious bank and brokerage firm out of Australia, just did a huge report, and they were not poo-pooing, but they were stating, be cautious, because there's plenty of lithium right now for anything that's going on in the world, but that won't be the case in the next 5 years. So that's what it is. It's a stock market, and you build in speculation.
We'll have more with Martyn Element right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Martyn Element. Martyn, another subject that you have a real shine for, and that's finding diamonds. What's happening with the diamond business?
Well, it's diamonds and it's gold, because I was really talking about alluvial as much as anything. The word alluvial. There's alluvial mining in gold, and there's alluvial diamond mining. But we'll start with diamonds. Alluvial diamonds, for instance, in Australia, by investors down there, and people in general, they have a huge aversion to alluvial, because being alluvial, traditionally, they're found mostly in the sands or in the river, the sides of a riverbank. And what they are, alluvial diamonds, of course, is that because I'm in the business, and to me, I've been around it for 30 years, but alluvials have actually broken away from the mother source, the kimberlite. And depending on how they've been formed or the size of the diamond are, from how long they've been in the water or how long ago it was that they broke away from the kimberlite and how far away, is depending on the condition of the diamond. But alluvials have been successfully found, of course, around the world. And they are very, very similar to alluvial gold mining, which, I'm like everybody else. I'm no different. I do like to watch occasionally that the Yukon show with the gold miners. How could you not find it exciting? Unless you're an environmentalist, of course. I'm sure you wouldn't find it exciting. You'd find it just like a hunting program if you hate killing of animals for hunting, anyway, let's not go there, but you know what I'm saying. But alluvial diamonds are being found in significant quantities in places like Angola. And they for instance, there's a company there that's an Australian-listed company. We have talked about it before, called Lucara. It's been in Angola, as I was reminded by a good friend of mine, Miles Kennedy, who is the chairman and the guy who put a lot of that together. He says, we've been here 7 years, Martyn. Everybody thinks it's an overnight success, but there's still a lot of skepticism built in with that particular company. But he has got it capitalized at about $150 million because he keeps finding some magnificent alluvial diamonds, and they're the fabulous quality. But of course, his whole agenda, or his whole plan, is to try and trace back where those diamonds came from. And the other things with alluvial, of course, is the thievery. That's another big biggie that people don't like, and can be a major problem, of course, which always is a worry. But they're trying to trace back where those diamonds broke away originally from a kimberlite. And that's why, instead of being capped at $150 million, if, for instance, on Lucara, they were able to track back, which they, in their news releases are saying that they're hoping, or they think they're on the right track, if they're able to track back the kimberlite, and if it's a kimberlite that hasn't eroded a lot, then, of course, the capitalization could go from one price to 10 times the price, into the billions, as we've witnessed right here up in Northwest Territories. So alluvials, but still, are the high risk in everybody's mind. And the same with the golds. Golds, again, for the same reason. They are, that was what the gold miners were chasing in the gold rush. And the first gold rush, they reckon, in this part of the world was actually only up the head just outside Hope, as it was being explained to me by, and I am name dropping because he's had a great illustrious career and continues to have, Gwen Thomas. That's where it all started, and then it went from there. But as his own daughter just discovered, but they were chasing equivalent when you see these miners at the side of a riverbank and they're panning for gold. That's because it's broken away from the source. And yes, there's a great money to be made by finding the right gold alluvial diamonds and gold, in that regard. And there's been, absolute fortunes made by doing that. But at that, to finding the source is a lot more difficult, and usually involves, going underground and heavy equipment and all sorts of things. But as it's just been proven recently with Ira Thomas, and I always pronounce it wrongly, but the Canamac, which just got bought by Goldcorp for over $500 million, of course, is, and that's a great story, which we've mentioned before, I won't go into it too much, that it's actually the hard rock side of what they were mining, probably further up the road there from where they were when they were coming into those areas of the Yukon and up in that part of the world. But it was a staging post. And it's actually beneath the staging post, arguably, is where they found this tremendous resource, which is going to be in production in the next couple of years. So it's interesting, really, and some of the more learned listeners that I'm sure listen to this, some of them, won't perhaps like the show this week because I'm really talking in elementary terms to them, of course. But it really is an interesting business, and it's what excites so many.
Martyn, in an alluvial situation, the shape of the mineral that you're sourcing, that you're bringing up, makes a big difference, whether it's smooth or jagged, right?
Absolutely, Jim, and that's a great point. Diamonds, for instance. If the diamonds are, for instance, and the edges are jagged and brittle or broken, the chances are that kimberlite is very, very close by. Because, there's always water seems to be involved. Well, there's always water involved with these situations, whether it's the ocean, where the rivers run out into the ocean, and you've got dredgers dredging the sand at the bottom of the ocean, or the riverbank. And if those edges are really brittle and as I say, and jagged, then, of course, you are probably very close, potentially, to kimberlite. And the same with gold. If the gold isn't that rounded nugget that looks so nice, by the way, but if it's more like like a jagged cube or quartz, and once again the edges are very brittle and not necessarily flaky, but in a brittle edged to the actual commodity itself. Then again, you're probably very close to the actual source of the gold or the resource itself, and that's of course remains whether the vein is 2 inches wide or feet wide or yards wide, of course. But so that is a very key signature for alluvial. But that's a great question, Jim. Great question. But I wanted just to say, Jim, coming back again to where the show started with lithium and marijuana, I personally have been in the business quite a long time, but more than once, I think actually I only did it once, but I swore to myself I would never, ever, ever get involved in a gold deal again. Because gold seems to have the wildest of swings, as does oil. I've never done a lot of oil business, by the way, listeners, but I said, you know what I don't like about gold is you can assemble the best team of guys, and by that, geologists, engineers. You can get involved with some fantastic money raisers, some people that really understand that space. You can have the right structure on the company itself, and you can think, wow, this is going to win it, and gold's trading at $800 or $1,000 an ounce, and then 3 months later it's $200 an ounce. And all those plans and everything you've done, all that hard work is gone. It's disappeared overnight, which is, of course, why, this game can be so devastating, as we witnessed in oil ourselves just recently. And I watched oil do it in 81 when it went from $80 down to $8, I think it went to, and I witnessed that myself in the early stages of my career. But so I swore away from gold because the swings were so great. But coming back to lithium again, listeners, and marijuana for that matter, but lithium, I just don't see lithium having those kinds of swings. I just don't. Could be wrong. Obviously none of us have none of us know. Nobody knows. But I think, but I guess the same scenario could apply to gold. If you hung on, you'd be in the chips, from that 250. I remember Great Britain under the Labour government sold all of its gold right at the bottom of the market, and recently ourselves in Canada have just cleared out. I think all of our gold reserves have also been sold here where we are right now, or just recently. So I'm just making the point of saying that I think that there's more to the burn, and don't forget about the other metals that are involved with the battery. And everybody gets wound up talking about the cars. Everybody's all cars. Well, hang on a minute. Elon is making these other things to do with your house. And can you imagine the biggest problem with, of course, electricity isn't generating it so much. Either it's solar, or it's using the tides, or it's using the windmills. It's being able to store it after you've generated it. And that's where the secret comes in. So it's not just about the automobile, it's about energy, period. It's about energy for your house, energy for production, and it's storing it other than the car. So there we go. I'm overflogging the lithium story, Jim, but I've really sowed some good food for thoughts. I've had a busy time myself this week because I've been involved with a cold-pressed juice company called Buddha. I wish I'd had more success with the money-raising side of that, but I've been involved with that company, and I'm watching Buddha Juice becoming, I believe, in the future, probably the largest company of its kind in the cold-pressed juicing. Organic, cold-pressed, glass-bottled, farm to the consumer product. And it's been an exciting time, and it'll be an interesting time as the future goes on. What else you got for me there, Jim?
Well, we're just a little over 2 weeks away from the British referendum on whether they should stay in the European Union. And, of course, you must have conflicting thoughts on that.
Very. And I'll let you just tell you a little story, which I like to do to give you the right image. there's a whole piece of me, and I love Boris Johnson, rightfully, wrongfully so. I like him. I know he's ex-public school, as is the current Prime Minister. They were both school chums, both at the same time, in the same schools. But, Boris is heading up the exit, and so are a lot of other very bright people. And a lot of them are being called racist because part of the thing is they don't want to be with the EU because they don't want the open passports, and they're saying that with the migrations that there'll be a city the size of, in the very next few years, there'll be a city the size of Newcastle every 12 months being created in Great Britain. And where are all those people? Because it is a little tiny island. That's one of the factors. The other factors is that you're not governing your own laws. You're under the laws out of France. These are not elected people, which is another big criticism. And I could find a list of going on of why EU is not, let's leave EU. However, in my lifetime, I've also personally experienced the spending of the vast amounts of money that the EU represents. And by that, listeners, I mean I come originally from the outskirts of one of the grittiest, grimiest cities in Great Britain, or was, called Liverpool. And Glasgow was a similar story, and Newcastle was a similar story. And in more recent times, there was the city of Dublin, which I also experienced as a very little guy in the 50s. Which it was, for instance, in Dublin they had a river that ran through it, which is called the River Liffey, but it was known affectionately as the River Niffy because it was, to all intents and purposes, an open flowing sewer. And the children were running around with no shoes and socks on their feet, not just for begging, I mean, permanently. And living under tarpaulin at the side of the road, in the gullies at the side of the roads. I mean, I saw that. To me, it was an eye-opener because, it wasn't anything like that in Great Britain at the time, but this was in Dublin. Well, thanks to the EU and the billions and billions of dollars that were spent in Liverpool, that were spent in Glasgow, that were spent in Dublin, those cities are now, as you know, Dublin is one of the most tourism is huge in Dublin because it's so beautiful and all those wonderful things. As is Liverpool, where they are building ports to take these super huge cruise ships because it's one of the most popular destinations and requested from people all over the world. They want to go to Liverpool. That is money that came out of the EU purse. And yes, billions of dollars were put in by all these different countries. So, there's always the other side, just like a marriage, just like anything. There's always the other side to the story. So I'm not taking sides. I'm observing as always. I'm just commenting. And I think that it's a very tough one. It'll be very, very tight. Do I give a prediction at this stage, Jim?
Well, you can because you have a 50-50 chance of being right.
Well, here's my answer. I think I've said it before. Win or lose, leave or stay. There's wiser brains than mine and commentators and people that know an awful lot more about those kinds of things than I will ever know in my lifetime and ever, that they think it won't be the end of it, whether it's a stay or go. And I think that's probably a very true statement, especially if it's very close. So I think fear is an awful thing. And I think they've done a great job of selling the fear, particularly to the older generation. And the older generation saying that their pensions could be affected. The older generation, because there's all kinds of unbelievable percentages of people living outside the UK in a lot of these EU countries, such as France. And they're saying that could very much be jeopardized if it's a vote to leave. And that, by the way, it doesn't sound that far-fetched to me on the problems of living in these countries. The pension, I don't know. I don't really see that being, but they have scared the living, out of a lot of the pensioners in Great Britain. And then you've got the younger generation. And I must admit, I don't really know what the stats are or what they're saying. But they could be the difference, of course, as they so often are in these situations. I think the fear will overrule the people wanting to leave and say, to hell with you, we want to conduct ourselves. And, I think it'll be, but mind you, I've made prophecies before. They've been so bad. So, maybe I shouldn't do that and give the political answer. But there you go, Jim. That's my comment. It'll be an interesting time. What I'm fearing about is more simplistic things like, business. Sport is business. And we've got one of the biggest spectacles, two of the biggest spectacles coming up here this summer. The first one's going to be in France with the soccer, which, is very frightening. The thought there for all the wrong reasons, very scary what could happen there given the climate of what's happening in France. I'm sure they must be just having a terrible time there worrying about security. I hope that there's nothing happens, but it's awful. And then, of course, you've got the Olympics coming off in Brazil, in a country that's basically on its knees because of one thing and another, and in trouble with the government. And now, and to top it off, they've got the terrible problem with, give me the name here, please, Jim. What's it called?
Zika virus.
The Zika virus, that's correct. Sorry, listeners. The Zika virus, and how difficult is it? Here's a country that can't really afford to be putting this thing on right now for 1 second. Yet they've got the added, distraction, and you've got all the retesting of all the athletes themselves for the spectacle. I mean, the poor country is already on the canvas. I'm talking about that. Of course, we've had 2 deaths. One that is a very famous woman in the theater, in the television on comedy. She was the #1 comedy writer for sitcom in Great Britain in the 70s with Liver Birds, which went on to be Three's Company here in North America. And then she did another company business called Bread, which was set in Liverpool. So both were set in Liverpool. And she's died recently. They're having her funeral on Thursday in Liverpool Cathedral, and I met her. Her name was Carla Lane. Wonderful, funny lady. And another day I tell a story about when I did meet her. And a very funny lady, naturally. Unfortunately, she's gone. And then on Friday, you've got one of the greatest sports men in my lifetime and most of the listeners' lifetime. A wonderful man. I used to know him. We all used to know him as Cassius Clay. Of course, he changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And sadly, we've had a couple of people leave us. And there we are, not to leave on too sad a note, Jim, but it'll be a busy week for funerals, and we'll see what happens with the yellow metal. And just finishing off on that, of course, and changing gears there for everybody, on a more happier note is that gold did what it did and looked like it was teasing 1,300. I think it actually traded there for a day or an hour. And then suddenly, with the saber rattling of interest rates potentially being put up again in the United States, of course, it fell right down and was teasing the $100 less. Took so much air out of the tires and so much of the excitement out of the local market here, being what it is with gold stocks. And it was just wow, someone throwing bucket after bucket of ice cold water. And then the employment figures came out at the end of last week, of course, and there was the mention of, maybe the interest rates won't go up. And gold, I looked at it on the chart. It wasn't a hockey stick. It was a rocket ship, just straight up. And it just shows you, though, just how tight and how alarmingly tight is gold at the moment, and currencies for that matter. So, a lot of these gold companies got thrown a lifeline, and it'll be really interesting to see. I'm sure it'll pull back, but there's some other decisions being made in that arena. So there you go, listeners, on a beautiful summer. Seems to have started about 2 or 3 weeks early here in Western Canada anyway. And I don't know what the summer's going to be like in July and August. If it's 25 degrees now, first week of June, listeners from all over the world.
Martyn, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Oh, it's a delight, Jim, and let's get together in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll find some more interesting and some things to talk about.
My guest has been Martyn Element, a Vancouver marketing and corporate consultant who focuses on sourcing and pursuing new business ventures. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments or questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.